Good morning, afternoon, wherever you may be in the world today, and welcome to today's session, Risk Management, the Essential Ingredient for Cloud Transformation. My name's Emma, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm on the marketing team here at SafePaaS. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Nick Stanoszek, Senior Manager at EY, Cara Smith, Manager Technology Consulting at EY, and then Navinder Kaplish, and Adil Khan, CEO here at SafePaaS. Just a few housekeeping items before we do get started. The session will be recorded and you'll all receive a recording of the session afterwards. If you do have any questions, we would love you to participate in the session, so please feel free to pop those in the control panel and we'll hopefully have time for some Q&A at the end of the session. So yeah. This is the agenda we'll be following today. We'll start off with some brief introductions, talk about some considerations for a move to the cloud versus on-premise complexities, and then go on to talk about solutions that can help you overcome those challenges. So Nick, over to you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Nick Stanoszek here, Senior Manager with Ernst & Young. I've been working with specific in our Oracle GRC Technology Group, and our focus is any of the Oracle products, NetSuite, as well as Workday as well, although that doesn't fall under the Oracle name. But we also have peers that are over in the SAP side as well. But as a whole, in Oracle GRC Technology, our goal here is to build a trusted application, right? A system that has controls in place, a system that has application security to be confident in all of these types of things, so that way when you go live or your providers go live, everything is trusted and everything is controlled, right? So we have 5 pillars, and our ERP trusted solutions come across those 5 pillars. So we have risk and internal controls, which are your business process controls, IT controls, application controls, all of those different types of setups within the application itself. We have application and data security, so application roles, for example, in Oracle Cloud. We have segregation of duties, so SOD frameworks. We also have sensitive access in there as well. Authentication and data privacy. We have user and identity governance, so role-based access. How are we maintaining roles within the business? Not just roles within the application, but roles across the enterprise. How does that all tie together? Enterprise roles, things like that. So maybe you have a specific role that's going to span several systems that's automatically going to provision a user access to those systems. And how is that managed and UARs across on a quarterly basis? Evolving risk management. So how are we managing all of our controls? How are we managing our control environment? So whether it's application and release management for Oracle Cloud or any of the other cloud systems, right? Any of these releases that are going to come out quarterly, how are we managing that? How are we managing our process controls on a regular basis? How are we managing change management overall, right? How are we getting all that detail? And then lastly, implementation risk management, which is I think a big oversight in a lot of transformations, is how do we know we're ready for go live? How do we know we're going to have a successful go live? And a lot of these bullet points here are going to help us address those specific points during our transformations, right? So we have maybe 1-2 touch points during the transformation to ensure that we have controls in place, we have security in place, so that way we can rely on those controls. And we have done our due diligence in terms of conversions or interfaces or all these types of touch points to make sure that when the system goes live, everything is confident, everything is trusted, right? So that is EY GRC technology as a whole. Again, touching on those 5 pillars there, and then making sure that all of our clients and all of their systems are ready to go and successful at go live. Our GRC technology group, I touched a little bit about our trusted solutions, right? And some of these areas now are the areas that we specifically can provide services on, right? And we provide services. I like to think of us as the intermediary between an SI and our internal controls, internal audit, or risk transformation, if you would, right? So we're in between there that are going to develop controls, develop ways to make sure that we have a trusted solution. So some of the areas, these 4 areas are ways that we help clients today. And again, over here on the left side, you'll see that we have several different systems that we work in, specifically myself and Cara. However, we do have peers that work in other of the applications as well, such as SAP and so on. So just kind of, this is just going to be a high level on us, but we do have others that do the other applications as well. Some of the areas that we help with: security and control implementation. So everything from designing application security and controls, and that includes business process controls, and that also includes IT controls. Designing those, building them in the application and testing them, and then obviously going live with those at go live. Building SOD frameworks from the ground up, as well as testing them, testing the application control, our application roles as well with that framework. And you'll see as we kind of come down here into number 3, I'll touch on this, but testing those SOD controls is where SafePaaS is a lot of times is going to come into play, right? So a way that we can actually automate a testing process for validating whether or not we have inter-role conflicts or intra-role conflicts. And that's a great tool. Obviously, we'll touch on a lot about what they do, but it's a great tool to automate that process. Pre and post go live assessments, we touched on that, is are our clients ready for go live? Have they done the due diligence to make sure they're ready for go live and to have a successful and trusted application at go live? So we cover on SDLC controls, business process controls, application security, data conversion, IT controls, all of these aspects of the business. When we go from an on-premise application to a cloud application, there are going to be a lot of differences and a lot of nuances between the two. And so we need to make sure that our clients have coverage in these areas prior to go live. So that way, when they come to go live, there isn't a step in there where they don't have confident controls. There's maybe inadequate controls, I apologize, at go live, where maybe you have to do lookback procedures, etc. So that's a very important step, especially as we kind of go to the cloud. There's a lot of nuances with the cloud. Technology enablement, SafePaaS, for example, where we can actually enable technology during given transformations and for post go live, so they can manage and monitor application security controls on an ongoing basis, right? So helping with that, making sure that the right tools are there and the right processes are in place. And then lastly, segregation of duties, pretty simple and straightforward, but assessing roles and responsibilities on a regular basis or on an ad hoc basis, right? This includes validating and baselining a framework if the framework exists. This also includes creating a framework if one doesn't exist. So ensuring that we have some type of control on the application security prior to go live is great. If, obviously we do the design as well, but again, you also think about post go live, making sure that the roles and responsibilities are managed and maintained correctly against that framework. So assessing those on a regular basis. I'm going to go to the next slide.
Hi, this is Adil Khan. Do you want me to? Yeah, let's go to the next slide. Let's just skip that. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Nick. You're on a roll. Why don't you cover this too?
Can we go through? Yeah, I apologize. It wasn't flipping on my screen. Sorry about that. So why are clients going to the cloud? What are the top considerations and objectives for going to the cloud? Obviously, one of the biggest pieces here is the lower cost of ownership, right? There's no servers to maintain on a regular basis. There are, we're moving away maybe for Oracle Cloud's example, moving away from those DBAs where we have databases to maintain and all of these types of things. So overall, lower cost of ownership, a lot more uptime to be able to rely on the application, etc. It's a lot more scalable and a lot more flexible, easier deployment. You have a complete solution. They're a lot more innovative. It's a lot more newer technologies. There's some competitive advantages in there. There's a lot more tie-ins from outside applications, etc. And then obviously you have some better analytics. So moving to the cloud, there's a lot of reasons to move. I think to me the biggest one is the lower cost of ownership and the ease of deployment. If we think about the on-premise solutions in the past, getting the application up and running is a task in and of itself. With the cloud, everything's up and running. You kind of are delivered the solution, and all you have to do then is go in and configure the solution. So it's a little bit quicker to go live. Aside from that, we look at an ongoing basis, patches and releases and all of these different things that are going to impact the application regularly. This is more of a consistency across, right? So there's going to be patches that are released on a quarterly basis, maybe they're monthly basis, whatever it is, but everybody's going to be on the same application. So we're going to benefit from other issues, other bugs, other improvements that maybe other clients have come up with, and you're going to benefit from those on a regular basis. So overall, keeping it innovative, staying up with the patches, all of these things are going to be more consistent, more flexible, more scalable on a regular, ongoing basis. So I think there's some massive considerations here, and you'll start to see this more and more as we kind of proceed into the next couple of years. Carl, I'm going to hand this over to you to kind of talk a little bit about the cloud versus on-premise. Obviously, there are complexities here, and there's a lot of differences between the two, and some risk considerations across that. So, Carl, I'll hand that over to you, and thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Hello, all. I'm Cara Smith with EY, and one of the things that we know as we move into a cloud environment is that the changes that you will see from an on-premise solution to the cloud does necessitate some changes within your organization and how you think about your solution going forward to make it robust, scalable, and sustainable over the longer term. Some of the big fundamental changes that you should consider as you're moving into this new environment is that hosting is substantially different. It used to be on-premise, you had DBAs and IT teams and who were managing the application in-house. You had complete control over when things were migrated, when you put in patches, when you updated your environment, you made configuration changes. All of those things were part and parcel of what you would do with an on-premise system. Now, with cloud, system configurations are centralized in the application, and they're usually managed by third-party providers. There are some configurations that you are in charge of and have complete access to. However, if you need a new function or you need additional development, that's something that you'll have to coordinate with your service provider on in terms of timing. Other things to consider there are around application security. Again, with on-prem, you have a lot of control over those application security roles, responsibilities, and privileges, making changes, updating them, all of which continues to be the case in cloud. However, the underlying configuration is substantially changed in the cloud. There's an increased amount of complexity here. What you were used to doing in a previous environment has changed quite dramatically. As an example, many of our clients, especially global clients or people who have multiple business units, as you may have, what they're finding is that in their on-prem systems, they were developing responsibilities that were really fine-tuned for those specific business units. Now, managing those roles is quite different in that you may have one global role and you're managing access and privileges through data security. So conceptually, it's quite different. It does change your framework a bit, and it certainly requires you taking a look at things like your SOD and sensitive access or privileged access rule sets to ensure that they're aligned as you move forward. We talked about roles and responsibilities a little bit. I can't understate the complexity of the architecture. Architecture in this space is very complex. There are a lot of changes and a lot of nuances, and the way that roles interact with each other is no longer a straightforward analysis. So things like GRC enablement tools are going to help you identify potential inherent conflicts or excessive or pervasive access. Without those tools, the level of analysis and detail that you will need in order to really understand how these roles are configured and what accesses they grant, especially as they're combined with others, may change substantially and require a great deal of effort. So something to consider as you move forward. Can we go to the next slide? Okay. System configuration and change management also is quite different. Again, you have an increased, so in the past, in on-prem systems, you as a business owner and a stakeholder really could dictate when you had patches introduced into your system, if you had bug fixes, if you had other things that you wanted to introduce into your application, you had much more control over the timing of those changes. Now, with cloud being a hosted environment, you'll be more subject to Oracle's timing in terms of quarterly patch releases and what they're going to be releasing into your system. So having a proactive view of those changes and making sure that you have integrated change testing that is very proactive to make sure you understand the impact of those changes to your environment is going to be very important for you as you operate. Change monitoring. Oracle Cloud does offer audit functionality in which you can actually, you can turn on audit rules for selected configurations. You can configure different audit rules to assist you in audit and ensure that you have a clear line of sight and traceability on some of the key changes that may happen in your environment. This is quite different from the on-premise approach where it used to be that you could just run SQL queries against your database and you could pull reports that tell you, oh, hey, these are the changes, this is what happened, here's who did it. Now you have less of that access, in fact, none at all, depending on your solution. So you do have to rely more on some of this audit reporting to manage and understand the changes that are taking place in your environment. Last but not least, business and IT general controls. I can't stress enough that taking a look at these early and often during your implementation lifecycle is going to be very important. It's not safe to assume that your business controls and your IT general controls will remain the same. There will be updates and changes that are required in order to keep you compliant and ensure that you're addressing the right risks in your environment. So things to consider as you do that. One of the things that we've seen that is most successful in the implementations that we work on from an EY team is that you have early integration of your internal audit or internal compliance teams to ensure that you have a good line of sight on some of the changes that may be required in this space. So things to consider as you move forward. Don't assume that your current risk and controls matrices are going to address the risks that you may see in the cloud environment as you move forward. So with that, I'm going to pass it back. I think, are we going to Navinder?
Yes, we are. Thank you, Kara. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay.
Yes.
Okay, so Navinder Kaplish from SafePaaS, and I'm going to build on what Kara and Nick said and start with a customer story. So this is an actual case study from a customer, but we have this capability to do to integrate with other systems for the for customers generally. So specifically in this case, the customer going live with Oracle Cloud, legacy EBS customer. Also, they had a fairly complex application environment. The IDM system in place was SailPoint, which is quite popular with large enterprise customers. The IT service management system is ServiceNow, also very popular. And this particular use case that we're talking about is specifically for user access reviews or access recertification. And what we did there in this case is we basically integrated with SailPoint, ServiceNow, and Oracle Cloud. And we are basically using source data from Oracle Cloud and other applications, not just for Oracle Cloud that we've done this. We're extracting various security model related information from the IDM, which is SailPoint. We've built an integration there via APIs. And once the periodic user certification happens in the SafePaaS system, which is basically the periodic user access survey, based on accesses that are terminated, automatically we've integrated with ServiceNow, whereby tickets are generated in ServiceNow for end dating that access and assigned to the correct teams in that business for removing that access. Also, once the access is removed and the ticket is closed, we get a notification back into SafePaaS via another interface. So in SafePaaS, you have complete details for this particular control. You've got the end-to-end survey, which is completely automated, approvals and and rejections of access. We have all the details of which accesses were supposed to be removed and a ticket is raised. We also have details of which tickets were actioned. So one-stop shop as an audit platform. And that's what we're seeing more and more demand of. We've got clients going from on-premise to the cloud. And some of the things that Kara and Nick talked about in terms of challenges, we see those challenges. We've also got other integrated systems that also need to be, involved in the key controls. We work closely with the internal audit and internal compliance and controls teams in this example to perform this integration. So, Adil, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add from an architecture perspective. I think I covered the big picture customer story.
Yeah, no, that's a good example of one of many access governance components on SafePaaS platform. I think Nick mentioned earlier about the segregation of duties. So, Kara talked a little bit about the need to have those change controls in place because the way the cloud architecture is different and the need for having that audit changes. So these are all examples of how, access has different ways of materializing risk in the cloud versus on-premise. And SafePaaS provides the full coverage from roles, design, simulation, as there's a question I saw popped up, to what you mentioned, Nav, around the recertification of access on an ongoing basis in the cloud. One of the challenges when you use ServiceNow from an architecture standpoint that I can maybe add to what you said, Nav, is that if you're using ServiceNow or some other provisioning system, they're based on catalogs, right? So you have created a catalog for Cloud ERP as part of your go live. That catalog is typically at the abstract role level, which means that you may have someone called finance manager. Now, finance manager may consist of 4 different roles in Oracle Cloud ERP, which includes, let's say, payables inquiry, AR inquiry, and GL. And then there's data groups and contextualized access by business units, right? So what we used to call profile options are now constraints around the data groups and context and context. So to build all that, we have the ability in SafePaaS to model the data that's in ServiceNow through our standard out-of-the-box APIs for ServiceNow, and model the data what's straight out of the box from Cloud ERP. So we take those security models, we can even merge them and cross-link them in SafePaaS. So when the user receives a action or a issue for a violation, whether it's a SOD or a provisioning request for someone to be approved or certification, as we're talking here, they can see the full picture, right? That how it was requested, approved, certified, and how is it being granted in Cloud ERP. So that takes away one of the major audit finding that we're seeing in the cloud customers, which is your provisioning systems that have gone online, as I think Nick said earlier, and you've got your ERPs online. So now you've got all this online in the cloud information, right? But they don't reconcile. So you may run into issues of people requesting access directly in cloud, people requesting through emails, as well as through your provisioning system, your ITSM system that is supposedly doing the fulfillment, but it's not testing your fulfillment request for SOD. So you can end up with segregation of duty issues. And also it's not providing the full picture. So you have to manually maintain these catalogs. So we're finding that our customers and their auditors are raising that as a concern. So to solve that problem, we have built this architecture that looks complex with these 8 different integrations. But what it does, it takes away, months and months, if not years of effort and cost from your project. So if you're thinking about going down to a on-premise to cloud, this is one component of risk in your project that you can eliminate by adding automated capabilities within SafePaaS. Or if you're already live and you're operating the business on cloud, you can again reduce the risk of findings and remediation if you can ensure that your provisioning system is sending fulfillment requests that are SOD tested as well as completed with that consistency between what's provisioned and what's was the provisioning request, because those gaps create chaos, especially in the cloud, because you have limited access to go run SQL queries, or as Kara said, no access really. So yeah, that's where some of this architecture, I can get a lot deeper into it, but given limited time, that's all I'll say. But if you need any specific details on this architecture, please reach out through Emma. We'll be glad to talk you through specific to your needs, because what I said about ServiceNow also applies to Remedy and Jira and whatever service ticketing system you use. And whether you use SailPoint or Saviynt or Okta or any of those, IDM, IGA solutions, all of that is relative as well. So thank you. Next slide. So yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about a customer that both Nav and I worked with, Nav being the PMO. And again, I'll cover the architecture side, but now if you can just kind of talk about how we monitor configurations. And I know you're working on a number of projects right now where we're helping address those concerns, both on-premise and cloud. That'd be great.
Yeah, so this is a specialized area in terms of controls, configuration monitoring, or in some risk and control matrices. How do you track privileged activity in the system? So for this particular example, we've got another customer story. What we did is basically work with the client to draw up a list of key configuration controls that they wanted to enable audit tracking on, and with the SafePaaS solution, MonitorPaaS, we basically implemented object level tracking, whereby you could see who's made the change to that particular form in Oracle, and when the change was made, what the old value was, what the new value is. And we can do this not just for EBS, which is on-premise, the older version, but we're also doing a project now where we're doing this for ERP Cloud. So in terms of benefits there, it's easily demonstrable to the auditors that you're actually tracking key configuration, and especially valuable if you've got a managed services partner or if you've got an external team which is supporting you or managing your configurations, and you want confidence around that whatever's past the change board is actually what's being implemented in the system and nothing else. So yeah, that's basically what we did in a nutshell.
Yeah, so you might be wondering that, why would we build a second mousetrap if Oracle has auditing, as Kara said. So auditing that's available in Oracle has some gaps. While it's a great start to get started, but it has some gaps. For example, it doesn't cover all it doesn't provide full coverage, right? So it only is available when Oracle decides to make it available on certain objects. So where it's available, we leverage it. But where it's not available, we have built out this capability within SafePaaS where we can leverage the APIs that Oracle exposed to us to essentially enable auditing, and then using the OTBI reporting capabilities, be able to launch frequent snapshots and treat them, because we can't put triggers and we can't track changes. We're able to take frequent snapshots and then internally within SafePaaS architecture, be able to compare them. So the burden, the couple of burdens on audit and compliance folks, and not to mention the business users, is that when that change occurs, right, you're now obligated to compare that with the previous results, as well as take an action if the change was inaccurate, right? So somebody changed the payment terms or supplier bank account that you want to not approve and prevent that from happening. So we're able to, with our architecture, able to not only notify that through a workflow to that control owner or the auditor as an FYI required, we can also notify that change was unauthorized. So our customers are using this in many different ways, right? So customers are, again, using an ITSM system like ServiceNow we talked about is popular right now, where they will log a ticket for change. So somebody says, okay, I want to introduce a new payment term. So that is logged as a ticket into your service system. And that ticket actually, that means that you give somebody the access to go to setups. So now you're creating a high privilege, right, for that user to go in. We call it firefighter at SafePaaS. But that user goes in and makes the change. But you want to make sure that's the only change they made. They didn't go change the supplier bank account. So now you need a control around that process. So SafePaaS takes that to the next level. Like I said, we can grab the audit tables through APIs where available, but for where they're not available, we can also launch our API services that will track that activity. And so what that means to you is that you can have a complete coverage, which is what auditors are looking for and what your management needs, right? That there's a complete coverage on a process flow. So if you think about, let's say, your source to pay process, there are many of these opportunities for, defects in the control. And to prevent those defects and make sure control is continuously operating correctly, you want to make sure that your partner like E&Y, when they design the control and they tell you about these controls, that you can then monitor them using a combination of approaches that best suits your business and optimize that for performance. Like I said, we have incident tracking too. So if there's an incident, it's tracked in a closed loop manner, including the ability to track the incident number from your ServiceNow account, right? So when it comes down to a quarter end reconciliation between what was requested, what was changed in the system after you've gone live, you have a complete trail on that. So that's on customers that are already live in cloud. By the way, this technology works for other non-Oracle systems too. So since we're focusing on cloud ERP, I'll stick with that. So the second piece is, what if you're starting a project, right? So now you have a different use case before you get to that steady state, right? So you're designing these controls, you're working with your partner E&Y, let's say, and they're giving you this great input on where to enable the standard controls within cloud ERP, because that's your first line of defense really. And you're enabling three-way matching, approval hierarchy, workflows. Maybe you're building custom workflows and reports to do special reconciliation based on your business model. So now you have all this activity going on, and you've got a cloud-based environment, as Kara said. So you're moving across your SDLC environments. So you're starting with a lower environment like dev, and eventually gearing to test, QA, UAT, and prod, pre-prod, whatever that example that you want to use. And so now you've got a change management problem during the project. So if you're, let's say, a systems integrator like Accenture or E&Y or whoever that is your partner, you also have to make sure that you are controlling that change during the project to ensure project governance and reducing the project risk itself. So we provide you the ability to do comparisons, right? This is the same technology we had in E&Y at eBusiness on-premise world. We have obviously adopted the same capability for the cloud, so you can do comparisons across different instances to make sure that those changes that are approved and accepted are being propagated into the higher environments. So your setups are not getting changed, and you can use that as a documentation to ensure that your controls are in place. So while E&Y has all this controls knowledge, in some cases we also work with E&Y where they're working with an existing SI that doesn't have that knowledge, right? So that's a deficiency in their offerings, and that's where we partner up with E&Y to come in and say, okay, guys, while the customer is flipping the switches to enable the process, as SafePaaS and E&Y, we can help you ensure that during the project, that all those governance controls that you should have that eventually be tested as part of your SDLC lifecycle, that they're all in place, right? So that's another way to utilize SafePaaS and E&Y together to be able to ensure that when your project gets into UAT and during the deployment stages, user acceptance testing, that's not the time that you bring in the audit folks, right? Because or the advisory folks, because that's too late, right? Now you have a big burn rate, and you're basically trying to go live, and your external auditors are holding you up because your controls are not fully effective, and they don't have good evidence that what was signed off has made it in the design, has made it to prod. So traceability matrix, that's a term I hear a lot from our customers, is accurate. So many ways to use that configuration. This customer used it in one way, but we have many other examples. So key again is to talk to us, and we'll help you identify those risks. Next slide. And that just basically talks about how we enable that, right? So I sort of covered that on the previous slide. I was thinking about this one, but basically so one of the things that Nick said earlier was, well, how does GRC technology enable this, right? And that's what we're going to talk about next. So these are enabling technologies that I'll get into for those of you that are thinking about considering SafePaaS or something similar for deployment. I'll get into a little more of the details on how to enable this in SafePaaS. So as I mentioned a minute ago, number one talks about creating that collaboration. And it's not just about customers that are deployed, but in the project, it's even more chaotic, right? Because we're all working in a hybrid environment. Many are remote across the globe. Most of our customers are global. So the project teams are global. And so the collaboration aspect of, how do we, get good requirements, design the solution, and configure and deploy that, they're happening now on SafePaaS using dashboards and roles, for example, being able to simulate role design and tracking that. So that's all enabled in SafePaaS. So what happens when you go live, not only are you going live with your ERP, but you're also taking on all these controls you've developed during the project and flipping the switch to make sure they continuously monitor the controls that you're relying on for financial statement, risk management, and so forth. So that's the first point. Second point is early detection potential issues, right? So this is where you've gone live and now you have issues with, let's say you loaded data through a third-party tool, or you had some manually entered, you brought in some contractors, put data in, and now you have issues with, let's say, duplicate master data or even transactions, right? So invoices got paid twice. You want to prevent that. So with the fuzzy logic in SafePaaS, you can do transaction monitoring. You can also use it for what we call lookback analysis, right? Auditors call that lookback analysis, which is to say that you can see what risk has materialized. In other words, SOD is a good example. SOD tells you what people can do. And the materialized risk analysis or lookback analysis through our advanced analytics in SafePaaS will tell you what do they do, right? So if they have the ability to create suppliers and pay supplier, too bad, we didn't catch that or we didn't remediate that in time. But now you've got to explain to your audit committee why did that not get caught and what you can do to figure out if that actually resulted in materialized risk. So being able to do that analysis, that lookback analysis really helps you kind of pinpoint if that can do turn into do, right? So you want to avoid that. The third point is rapid deployment. So these configurations and controls, obviously, because we're on a SaaS platform, we have over 6 million users using our platform, being monitored every day. It's a highly scalable platform. So we have collected over the years, we've been doing this for a long time, for the cloud for the last 5 years, collected a lot of this controls logic. So that's part of SafePaaS repository. And our partners like E&Y have a ton more. So by working with the two teams here, you can pick and choose with the guidance and advisory coming from E&Y on which controls are relative, but it's a jump start. So you're not starting from scratch. E&Y is great at using some of the templates and content we already have and build on that. I mean, three-way match testing is pretty much the same whether you're a company that does distribution or retail, right? So when you take in your PO process, that's pretty much the same. So many of the things can be scaled. Others are industry specific, which is where E&Y brings that domain knowledge. that you can rely on. But the things that are supplier changes, customer credits, and all that are fairly standard. So the pre-built content is a good way to jumpstart your control. If, let's say, you just missed that, it wasn't part of your initial thought in the project, and it wasn't part of the plan, yeah, it's not too late. We can help you jumpstart. So that's the point we wanted to make about how you can proactively manage risk with SafePaaS and E&Y together.
Thanks for that, Adil. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over the flows and best practices for the moment and go on to a customer case study. And then if we have time, we'll go back to the flows. But the slides will be available to all attendees anyway, with a summary of the session. So Navinder, if you can just walk us through this case study.
Sure. So this is a very famous company, one of our clients, global household name. So let me talk from the perspective of business challenges. So some of the challenges: number one, segregation of duties controls. I know Kara covered it in some detail earlier, but for this client, they had a lot of spreadsheets, and SOD was managed manually and imperfectly. They really wanted a platform that can enable them to periodically review and correct SOD. They also had some issues with user provisioning. They had different sources of information. In that regard, sometimes access was assigned via email approvals, sometimes it was via ServiceNow, sometimes via SailPoint. So there's no common control, one central location where everything was sort of managed from a controls perspective. User provisioning also was a big issue, not just for Oracle, but for many other global financial systems in scope for SOX. And these are the challenges they had. And what we've implemented there, we've basically done three things there. Number one, we've implemented our products for segregation duties, enterprise access monitor or policy monitor, depending on the system. So now they've got fine-grained SOD, which really helps them with their audit and controls, which wasn't the case earlier. We've also implemented an end-to-end user access recertification system there, which is completely automated without, it saves them a lot of time and a lot of effort, because like I said, it's a single source. We are the central audit platform, and they don't need to do 5 different systems to get data and to run surveys for recertification of access. And we're also implementing MonitorPaaS there, which is basically for tracking changes to key configurations. In terms of success, I mean, the client basically had audits then and had some improvement there. The automation aspect has been really appreciated, because sometimes our main sponsors are from the IT controls or the internal audit teams, and sometimes they're from IT, pure IT. And what happens with greater automation is that folks who are more IT oriented also see an improvement from the perspective of operational expenditure, or OPEX. So the money they're spending here, which is primarily for the investment that's being made, which is primarily for improving their control and helping them in audit challenges, also ends up helping them from an operational expenditure perspective, because there's less manual work. So I think, Emma, in a nutshell, I think I've covered all the key points. I don't know if Adil has anything else to add, but I think that's yeah, worth pausing.
No, I think you covered it. I just want to kind of put a bow on that by saying, yeah, so when you're thinking about taking on this major transformative project, I think people that know what they're doing and experts who've done it before and technology can really help enable that process and take some of the risk and ultimately cost out of this massive endeavor.
That's great. I am going to go on to the questions, because we have had some questions come in. So feel free to jump in and provide answers here. So question here: as an implementation consultant solution architect, I know that a custom role from an application perspective may conflict with the need for this role from a business as usual perspective. So if we customize a seeded role to accommodate this, it may cause issues in terms of complexity and maintenance. What are your thoughts here? Kara, Nick, anyone want to have a stab at that?
I can jump in here. As a top line thought on this is it is a much better proposition to build customized roles with a least privileged access perspective due to a number of factors. One, if you think about risk and controls, you really do want to make sure that you're giving your users what they need and no more than what they need. It minimizes questions, it minimizes concerns later, it minimizes rework in later terms. The other thing to consider is that delivered roles in Oracle Cloud, what we have observed at EY is the majority of those roles have inherent SOD conflicts. They provide excessive access, and they also introduce segregation of duties conflicts for your users in an environment that you're trying to reduce those types of conflicts. So we steer away from the use of the delivered roles for the majority of end users. There are exceptions, of course, there are always exceptions, but we would suggest strongly that you consider the use of customized roles that are fit to purpose for your organization. Does that answer the question or provide some context?
I think so, yeah, Cara, thank you, that's great. And that's exactly what we would help our customers do. From a tools perspective, though, we have this thing called Roles Manager. I don't know if you want to go back to that slide real quick, Emma, since we have a little bit of time, just for me to talk through that. So what we do is basically help you simulate that rule and so that role. So once we create that security model that we were talking about earlier, we're able to then work with partners like E&Y and basically, choose what permissions. Let's say it's a custom role, right? You can simply, by clicking, remove those privileges that are causing the excessive access, as Cara said, paraphrasing, and then also from an SOD perspective. So you can take a standard role from Oracle and minimize it to what the user actually needs, and also run a simulation within SafePaaS. So from an SDLC perspective, it saves you quite a bit of time and effort on a project. We had a customer that was able to generate, I think, 200 roles in 10 or 20% of the time than it would have taken them to build it from scratch. And all we did was really automate that simulation step, because what they were finding is that even though they had good people designing the role, the time it took from the role to move from dev to test to QA to slice all the way to pre-prod for UAT, that time was really causing a lot of delay. And there were changes coming in, like in projects, you don't always get perfect requirements. So what Simulator does is basically addresses both the functional requirements that the business consultants have, as well as the controls requirement that ultimately management cares for. So yeah, that's just a quick way of automating. This flow chart describes the swim lane sort of describes how you can set that up in SafePaaS quickly and get started to get clean roles and then output them. There's also partners and folks out there that provide pre-developed content that you can start with, and you can start with that and then customize it. So lots of different ways of doing this.
That's great. I had a question come in through LinkedIn earlier. Buy-in for risk and controls often gets pushed back. So how can we, get buy-in and prove that risk can be an actual driver rather than an obstacle in a project like this?
Should I take a shot at that?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
So, I mean, couple of quick comments first. Firstly, it depends on the geography and the regulation. I mean, if you're in the US and listed on either the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ, it's kind of mandatory that you're SOX compliant, and their risk is you need to manage risk. Either if you don't use, expertise that we've talked about on this call, you've got to find some other solution, because there is no way out. Some of these controls are quite critical from an IT general controls perspective, so you have to do it. If you're not in the US, or if you're not listed in the on the US exchanges, then I think globally there is a movement towards better compliance and better controls. In the UK, I know, for example, we've had government level conversations, and there've been reviews for having a UK SOX Lite type model, because there have been a number of companies recently which have had very very significant issues with audit, managing audit, and various things that happen in the company that really caused them to fail completely. In the UK, we've had quite a few prominent examples, and also in Germany recently there was an example. So I think that the direction of movement is that if you strictly look at it from a return on investment perspective, if you don't take care of risks, at least critical controls and risks at the start of a project like this, it's likely it'll come back and bite you in some way or the other, because these are really complicated systems. They're not something that you can fix in a day if your auditor comes in and raises issues, even if you're not SOX compliant. Because if, for example, in ERP Cloud, Kara touched upon this earlier, but the standard roles, there are many layers of roles underneath. There are parent-child relationships and inherited roles which go to, I don't know, the nth degree. And if you have SOD issues and you've been using standard roles, that's going to be a huge remediation effort. And that significant expenditure that's coming your way at some point if you haven't sorted that. But other controls as well are similar. Once you implement a process for assigning access, once you implement weak configuration controls around your change management, all of these areas that we've talked about today, prevention is better than cure, basically, because your cure is going to be a lot more painful and a lot more bitter from our experience. So I think the case builds itself if you can sell that to your management. And if you can't, I mean, this is really something that should have buy-in from the topmost levels of finance and IT management. But if you think about the 3 lines of defenses, your second line of defense, really, especially your internal controls team, should step up and help with this. I mean, I've seen they play a huge role in preventing some of these issues to go out of hand. So I would really encourage conversations cross process, because eventually it affects everybody if something goes wrong. Hopefully that helps them.
Hey, Navinder, thank you. If I could just add one other thing. I think I alluded to this earlier, and Navinder has touched on it as well. Early integration of your compliance and internal audit teams are going to help support this implementation and make sure that you're proactively looking at how this change affects your organization from an enterprise risk perspective, as well as just an ongoing operations perspective. One of the things that I've seen most successful is having early and often communication from your project leadership and your organizational leadership, encouraging a partnership with those types of teams internally to work through, what's it going to mean to me as a business user? What's it going to mean to me as an organization? So that everybody's kind of at the table at the right time, helping to think about some of the risks that you may be looking at, and some of the changes that you may be looking at in your organization. So early and often, lots of leadership support tends to lead to the most successful changes and implementations that I've seen.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Kara. I can't see any other questions. So does anybody have any closing comments, any top pieces of advice that they'd like to give our audience today on how to make a move to the cloud successful?
I can just maybe add a tip. If you already are on the cloud, or if you're moving to the cloud and it's new to you, just make sure you track the quarterly patch updates. This is quite a significant shift from premise release 12 to the cloud. Basically, Oracle every quarter comes out with a lot of updates for literally every single application, and some of them create new permissions, i.e. new functions. Some of them are completely new functionality. Some functionalities changed. It is quite a significant thing. It's not like the olden days, I guess, in one way. So I would highly recommend you focus attention on that and don't underestimate that.
Thanks, Navinder. Well, I think that's all we have time for. So if nobody else has any closing comments, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all our speakers today, especially Nick and Cara joining us from EY. If you would like a one-on-one session with any of the speakers today, then feel free to reach out to either Nick or myself. You have our contact details there on the screen. And we look forward to seeing you again at our session next month. So a big thank you to everyone for joining, and a huge thank you to our speakers today. And have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Emma. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.